in this section we are going to talk about the new concept, the barrier, okay, that isolate the gene pool. And there are two types, prezygotic and postzygotic. Now, we talked about barrier before, so those that prevent the gene flow between two populations, okay, and allowing these two population to become separate species. Now, scientists divide this barrier into two types, prezygotic and postzygotic. The term zygotic comes from zygote. Remember that when you have fertilization between sperm and egg, the first cell that you get is zygote. Okay, so which means that you have barrier that occurs before you get the zygote. So those barriers are called prezygotic. And after you get the zygote, there are some barriers that are called postzygotic barrier. All of these barriers help maintain separate species, okay, and sometimes in some species they use multiple barriers to maintain species, okay. So this term you see before, reproductive isolation prevent populations belonging to different species from interbreeding, even if their ranges overlap, even if they are in the same area, and categorized as prezygotic or postzygotic depending on whether or not these barriers function before or after the formation of zygote, or before or after the fertilization. All right, we will take a look at prezygotic barrier first. So this barrier prevent mating, or prevent fertilization, and there are 5 of them. Let's take a look at these. The first one, habitat isolation. This is simple. So you have two species living in different habitat in different area, so they never meet, and that's why they never breed and never have any offspring. So you can maintain different species like this. So you have in this particular example, you have 2 species of snake. Okay, one live mainly in water, the other one on land. Okay, so they rarely encounter each other and they don't have offspring. So this prevents the gene flow between these 2 populations. The second one, behavioral isolation. We talked about this earlier. This part, many species use elaborate behavior unique to species to attract mates. For example, in fireflies, the light signal is specific to each species. So other species cannot understand the signal of different species, so they never attract different species, so they can maintain its own species. And also courtship behavior of many birds are different. Okay, and the mating calls, the song of the bird or the frogs are different. So each species has its own language to attract the same species. The third barrier is called temporal isolation. So temporal is time. So these 2 species, they actually live in the same area, okay, in the same habitat. So they also have similar behavior, but there is no interbreeding between these 2 because they breed during different time. In some species, it could be different time of day. In some species, different season. In some species, different years. And in this example of these 2 skunks, they do not interbreed because one of the species breeds in summer, the other one in late winter. Okay, so there is no gene flow between these 2 populations, these 2 species. So you can maintain these 2 species. Now in the first 3 examples, this is before mating. But for the number 4, number 5, this is after the organism try to mate, but somehow it is failed. Okay, So in mechanical isolation, closely related species may attempt to mate but fail because they have different anatomy. For example, these two snails. If you look at the pattern, so one of them is like clockwise, the other one is counterclockwise. And as a result of that, when they try to mate, the sexual organs of these two species don't fit well, so they cannot exchange the sperm and eggs. Okay, so this is called mechanical isolation. It's about the anatomy. And also for the plants, for example, this is flowering plants, so they use different pollinators. For example, this kind of species use honeybee, and honeybee carry the pollens to the next flower. But honeybees only feed on this kind of plants. Honeybee cannot or may not prefer to go to this kind of plants because the shape of the flowers and the food may be different. Okay, so the mating you never get interbreeding between these two plant species. And in this plant species, the major pollinator is hummingbird, and the hummingbird never go to this plant species. So this is called mechanical isolation. Okay. The last one of prezygotic barrier is gametic isolation. In this case, two species attempt to mate, but somehow the gamete itself is not compatible. In this picture, you see the picture of sea urchin, and you have, this is the egg and this is the sperm. Okay, in order for the sperm to penetrate the eggs, you must have a receptor on the surface of the sperm that compatible with the receptor on the you must have the ligand on the surface of the sperm that compatible with receptors on the surface of the egg, like this. So you have the binding of the receptor and the ligand here. But if sperm is from different species, you cannot have this binding, and that sperm cannot penetrate the egg. Okay, so this kind of mechanism is so important, especially for species with external fertilization. Okay, this barrier is important to prevent cross-species fertilization. For example, for the frogs, during the breeding season, all of the species come to the river or certain places that have a lot of waters, and they release sperm and eggs into the same area. So if you don't have this kind of mechanism, this kind of barriers, all of the species will be mixed.